the newsagents.
The guy is paranoid. And this is crazy. When he needs to do his business on an international trip, there's a guy, a very tall guy, with a black suit and earpiece and so on, who carries around a suitcase with his business in it because he doesn't want to leave it at an international conference so people can like analyze it and see whether there's any, that's the kind of guy he is.
Sorry, you're talking about like...
when he goes for a
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
I swear to God.
That description of Vladimir Putin, a man both terrifying and, it seems, terrified, paranoid, crazy. As Yulia Navalny, the widow of the Russian activist Alexei Navalny, points the finger directly at Putin for murdering her husband, we ask what the rest of the world is going to do about Putin now. Welcome to the newsagents.
It's John.
It is John, and he's back in the armchair.
Where he belongs.
Where he belongs, a mere 3.5 feet away from me.
Right. There's going to be 10 minutes at the end of this podcast as my right of reply. I've also informed HR about bullying by you and Lewis Goodall, and it's going to be, your sledging was unacceptable. Okay. It delighted my kids, though.
Okay, 10-minute rant, everyone. You can go home early. We're going to start today with the words of Yulia Navalny. She's Navalny's widow as of Friday, and she has said that she wants to identify those responsible for her husband's death. She thinks he was poisoned with Novichok, the same nerve agent that they tried to kill him with 3 years ago before he served this latest sentence in a penal colony in the Arctic Circle. What Yulia is saying is that Putin killed her husband. It doesn't seem likely that anyone disagrees with her.
She's unambiguous that it was Putin who had him killed, direct orders, and she talked about how half of her soul and half of her heart had been lost with the death of her husband, but the other half that was left was going to continue his fight for freedom, for decency, for honour in Russian politics. But as we have seen, if you are an opponent of Vladimir Putin, you often end up dead.
So we're going to start essentially where we left you on Friday, and that was after the news of Navalny's death broke. And remember what we were told at the time, that he'd just gone for a walk and died shortly after that. He'd fallen unconscious because he wasn't very well after his walk. That was clearly a lie. That was clearly exposed pretty quickly, because they have since reported that medical staff found bruising on Navalny's body, consistent with him being restrained, consistent with him having a seizure. And what we have now learned through, and it is astonishing, there are still these activism bodies that are prepared to work in Russia to try and expose the truth, even though the FSB, the security service, the state is trying to cover up what happened. Why are they trying to cover it up? I mean, that's the question in a way, because everyone sort of knows that Putin was behind this. The timing was so exact that they had the sort of press release ready to go within 2 minutes of the time of his death being announced.
But even the humiliation that is then heaped on the family,
yes,
that they cannot get access to his body, presumably because there is Novichok inside it. And so there is this whole kind of farce that is going on, that there is this special investigative committee which can have up to 30 days before the body has to be released. And it's like they're following some quasi-judicial process, when there is no quasi-judicial process. They are going to do what the hell they like in terms of releasing his body at a time of their choosing.
I mean, spare a thought for Yulia, his widow, who had to decide whether to go and find her husband's body in, the Arctic Circle of Siberia first, or whether to carry on addressing the Munich Defence Conference, where she knows that she actually has access to the most powerful people involved in the response to Putin now. And that was what she chose to do. She made a speech within minutes, really hours, of learning of her husband's death. But Navalny's mother was the one who went up to try and bring her son home, and was sent from hospital to mortuary to investigations, and came away with nothing for exactly the reasons we presume you're talking about, which is they cannot release the body now because they know exactly how he died.
And we've heard this talk from Joe Biden, the president, saying, there are going to be devastating consequences as a result of this. And you think, well, what does that actually mean? Yeah. We've had 2 years of stringent sanctions against the Russian economy. And has it made any difference at all?
Every world leader has had to come out saying the right thing, expressing their shock, their horror, and talking about grave consequences, serious consequences. Lord Cameron has done the same here. And I guess what we're trying to work out now is what that actually means. Does it mean that you stop Putin in his tracks? Does it mean that you help Ukraine with funding? Does it mean that you feel more responsibility to those prisoners who are still Putin's political prisoners and get them out before the same thing happens again? And quite frankly, at the moment, we don't understand how the words, however well intended, translate into anything that changes for how the world deals with Putin.
But I guess if you're in Moscow and you're looking out from the Kremlin on the rest of the world, and Russia has just made the biggest gain in the war in Ukraine since last spring's offensive, which kind of spluttered and nothing came. They've retaken a city that was under Ukrainian control. You've seen in Congress the hold-up of this money, this $63 billion in aid for Ukraine, because the MAGA crowd don't want to support it. You've seen so many things where the West looks like it is faltering in its response. I think if you're Vladimir Putin, you're thinking, things are pretty good at the moment.
And I'm going into an election in exactly a month's time. Now, admittedly, an election in Russia is not an election we would recognise. There is going to be no other winner than Vladimir Putin. So in some ways, you're kind of thinking, why do you even need to get rid of your opponents? There is no opposition to you. There is no political democratic accountability anyway in Russia. So why has this come now? But yeah, Putin is about to get re-elected, unopposed. His opponents are mainly dead or quietened.
The West looks divided.
And the West can't even step in to try and support the place that you have invaded. Well, you heard the voice of Bill Browder at the very top of this episode. We're going to hear from him now. He is a thorn in the side to Vladimir Putin. He has tried to cut off Putin's funding, cut off Russia's funding where it hurts in the city of London and elsewhere with his Magnitsky Act. And he's also come on today to talk about the people that are still left in Russian prisons, that we have a responsibility and a duty to get out before they face the same fate as Navalny.
Bill Browder, it's great to have you with us. I know you're also just back from the Munich Security Conference, and it kind of coincides with Navalny's death. Where is Putin now? Does he just think he is unassailable? Was the timing deliberate? What do you make of it?
Well, I think the timing was very significant. First and foremost, the quote presidential elections, and I say quote presidential elections because they're not really presidential elections. It's a sort of pantomime or whatever of presidential elections, comes up in mid-March. And Putin, who is, he's really scared right now. He's scared. He's been around for 24 years. There was a time in his presidency when he might have won the hearts and minds of Russians, but now the only way he can keep the whole place going is by repression. And he's got this one guy in jail who's just disrespecting him no matter what, disseminating his disrespect and not feeling cowed. And that's Alexei Navalny, or that was Alexei Navalny. And Putin decided to kill Alexei Navalny for two reasons. One, get rid of Alexei Navalny. And two, send a message to anybody else who's even thinking about contemplating opposition that the consequence of being a political opposition candidate is death.
Bill, his wife Yulia has just come out and pointed the finger directly at Putin, said he killed my husband. There is no doubt, it sounds like, in your mind, that this was premeditated, pre-planned for Friday morning at the time when they knew they could announce it with the state media. Is that how you're reading this?
Well, this was definitely a pre-planned, targeted assassination organized by Vladimir Putin There's absolutely no. It's not in my mind. This is a matter of fact. And Putin has killed so many people at this point. So many opponents, investigative journalists, annoyances to him, business rivals, people who stand in the way of whatever he's trying to do. That I don't think that we should give him any more benefit of the doubt. He tried to kill Alexei Navalny using his security services in 2020 with Novichok. I mean. Normally, innocent until proven guilty, all that kind of stuff. Here, we can no longer do that with Vladimir Putin.
But isn't it extraordinary that on Friday there was this outpouring of international grief and shock and outrage, and what are we, sort of 72 hours on, we don't know how that translates into anything like action. We've heard that there'll be grave consequences. We don't know what Putin will actually respond to now, because it's not sanctions, is it?
Well, I'll tell you what he'll respond to. Right now, we're in the midst of a debate about the 300 billion of Russian central bank reserves that are frozen in the West. That's money that should be given to Ukraine for their defense and reconstruction. If we want to really change the calculus and punish Putin, we should stop pussyfooting around and we should confiscate that money. And what we should do is we should call that the Navalny Act. We should take away that money, call it the Navalny Act, and that would cause Putin great pain. That would help the Ukrainians, and that would be a real sign that we're outraged with Vladimir Putin.
But Bill, aren't there an awful lot of people who say that is a breach of international law, that you can't impose the legal system of one country on another country, and therefore you cannot do that?
Of course you can do that. We do that all the time. Every time somebody loses in a war, they pay war reparations. That's just historical practice. The only difference between now and that is that we're saying let's do it right now instead of waiting for Ukraine to lose the war. What are we going to give that money to Putin at the end of the war when he wins?
I mean, the other thing, of course, you can do is say you have to stop Putin from winning the war. So the money now, whether it's here or, in the Senate or whatever, goes into Ukraine because that is our best defence against Putin, right? Do you think that argument is being lost now? Has it dwindled?
Well, I mean, there are two times. There's the post-Navalny assassination time and the pre-Navalny assassination time. And people were growing tired of the war, and they were saying, why spend the money and all that kind of stuff. I think everyone's mind is now focused that Putin is a monster, and he's a monster who kills
focused enough to start giving more money to Ukraine. That's the question.
I guess, exactly. Does it change the calculus?
Definitely it changes the calculus. So if you're a Republican, far-right, MAGA member of the House of Representatives, part of a small group, and I should point out, small group of people who are currently blocking the $63 billion military aid package to Ukraine, it's going to be really hard for you to stand up in front of your constituents and say, I'm pro-Putin, I'm going to block that money. You could have done it politically when Tucker Carlson was in Moscow saying how great the metro was. You can't do that now after Putin has assassinated Alexei Navalny. It just doesn't stand up. That's political suicide. And it doesn't matter whether Donald Trump is calling them up on the phone and saying that stuff. You cannot be any kind of reasonable person in this world and do that.
But Bill, I was living in America for 8 years. That's exactly what they'll do. There hasn't been a word from Donald Trump. There hasn't been a word from Mike Johnson. There hasn't been a word from even Lindsey Graham, the senator for South Carolina, who was used to be a Russia hawk.
Well, trust me, when they all come back from their recess, this money this $63 billion will get approved.
You're sure?
I can't imagine a scenario where it doesn't.
There is a complicated square or circle that can't be squared, which is even here, the people that are vocally supporting Trump and still criticising Putin. And I put Boris Johnson, I guess, into that category as somebody who says we should welcome a new Trump era and professes to hate Putin. I'm not sure how you can bear those two things.
Those are irreconcilable thoughts. And all these people are trying to kind of tiptoe around the possibility that Trump comes in and so on. Trump supports Putin. He wants to withdraw from NATO, and he will be a disaster for Europe, for the UK, for Ukraine, and for all people who like peace in this part of the world.
Bill, your signature piece of legislation has been the Magnitsky Act, which is basically cutting off funding at source, Russian funding at source. How are we doing here in London? Because The Russia report is what, 4 or 5 years old now? And that made big noises, didn't it, about cleaning up London, cleaning up, the money from the capital and all the rest of it. I'm guessing that we are not a Russian money-free zone.
Well, I think we are now. I mean,
Are we?
Now we are. Yeah, I mean, the Russians don't feel comfortable coming here. It's not because we've said all of a sudden it's not welcome here. It's that the Russians don't feel comfortable putting their money here because they think the money can be frozen. And so,
Like the Chelsea Football Club.
Yeah,
assets.
exactly. And like the mansion that belongs to Alisher Usmanov up in Highgate and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sure the same exact individuals, the ones who are welcoming the Russians, would still welcome them if there are some very amoral people around here that have taken a lot of Russian money and done a lot of bag carrying for the Russians. They would love to have it.
Who are you talking about?
You know who I'm talking about.
You've just back from the Munich Security Conference. We've all the attention is on Navalny at the moment, but I think as well that there are other political prisoners inside, a British citizen as well, which you are campaigning to get out. Where has that got to?
So the main reason I went to the Munich Security Conference is because a very close friend and ally of mine, Vladimir Karamurza, who's a British citizen and a Russian citizen, he was one of the people who was most influential in helping me get the Magnitsky Act passed in 35 countries. The Russians hate the Magnitsky Act because it freezes their assets. And they tried to kill him using poison in 2015. He was in a coma, nearly died. They then poisoned him again in 2017. He nearly died. Survived both, but was disabled by these poisoning attempts. And then in 2020, he went back to Russia to protest the war. And I begged him not to go, and I said, don't go. And he said, I have to go. How can I ask the Russian people to stand up to Putin to stop this war if I'm afraid to go? He went there. He went on CNN. He gave an interview, and he said, Putin's a war criminal and a killer. And 12 hours later, he was arrested and sentenced to 25 years in prison in Siberia. He's in Siberia right now, in solitary confinement in Siberia, suffering profoundly from the after effects of the poison, which never subsided. And he's going to die in prison. And so I went to Munich, to the Munich Security Conference, and I set up meetings with a dozen foreign ministers. And I said, listen, here we have a situation where one of the most important political prisoners, one of the most important opposition people to Putin is going to die. He's a British citizen. We should fight to get him out. And what we have to do is we have to do one of these prisoner swaps. We have to find Russian spies who are arrested in the West and swap them out, like we did during the Soviet times. Nathan Sharansky, Vladimir Bukovsky, Bridge of Spies. Remember all that stuff? And I went around and I asked each foreign minister I met. I said, "Would you support this idea and this concept? And if we can find spies in your country to swap, would you support it?" And one after another, they said yes, 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 and yes. The only country that doesn't want to support this is the UK. And the UK says we have a policy where we don't negotiate for the release of hostages. This is the policy of the British government.
Did you talk to the opposition as well?
I talked to the opposition as well.
And same response?
I mean, I didn't get a clear response one way or the other. But this country has a policy of not... So Britain's going to sit this one out. I'm going to work with other countries, and we're going to find a way to get Vladimir Karamurza out of prison. And Britain, where he has a passport, is going to sit it out.
And morally, what do you think of that?
I'm outraged. I almost swore here. I'm outraged that these traditions of this country, bankers with bowler hats and wigs for barristers, and everyone's so wedded to these traditions that they're unwilling to even look at the reality of the situation, which is we have a guy, we need to save his life, or we're going to have another Navalny. It's going to be Karamurza.
So the legacy of Navalny's death has got to be, in your mind, don't let this happen again. Don't let this keep happening.
Of course it can't happen again. And this country is not going to lift a finger for him because it's the policy not to.
There are about 8,000 people on Navalny's list of those he thinks should be watched or brought to safety. I mean, it's a long list. I mean, I don't know if you're on that, Bill. You know what it's like to have the state at your back, presumably.
Yeah, they're after me big time. It means that you can't relax ever. They only have to, you've got to be lucky every day. They only have to be lucky once.
Does that change how you live your life?
Yeah, but it's changed how I lived my life, a long time ago. This has been going on for a long time.
But what happened on Friday must
It
sharpen
changes
that
everything,
view,
because
doesn't it?
if Putin's ready to kill Navalny, and then he's ready to kill anybody, anywhere, and
And can I
particularly
ask something really sort of juvenile and simplistic, but it's something that I would have asked as a 6-year-old that I don't understand now. Why isn't anyone just going after Putin himself? Why aren't there, special agents that are being sent in to just get rid of him if he is the biggest threat to, I would say, Western democracy, but democracy there is in the world?
Well, you remember that long table?
Yeah.
Why is he sitting at a long table? He was sitting at a long table because he didn't want Emmanuel Macron to spray him with some aerosol that will kill him or what. I mean, he remember how during COVID he was in his bunker and everybody had to have a 2-week quarantine. The guy is paranoid, and this is crazy. When he needs to do his business on an international trip, there's a guy, a very tall guy with a black suit and earpiece and so on, who carries around a suitcase because with his business in it, because he doesn't want to leave it at an international conference so people can analyze it and see whether there's any, that's the kind of guy he is.
Sorry, you're talking about
When he goes for a
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
I swear to God, that's the kind of guy we're talking about.
So, I mean, I just want to go back to your first answer, because you said something really interesting where you said it's weakness that makes him act like that. Whereas that seems counterintuitive to me, because I think it sounds like this is a man who just doesn't give a shit, and he can do what the hell he likes with impunity, and no one is going to say you can't do that, Vladimir.
Both things are not inconsistent. So when I'm saying he's weak, he's not loved by the Russian people. There's absolutely no love anymore of Vladimir Putin. What's there to love? There's been 400,000 deaths on the battlefield, 600,000 people wounded, another 1 million men left the country so they didn't find themselves in that situation. The planes are making emergency landings because they don't have parts. The banks you can't transfer money in and out. You can't use YouTube. You can't use Instagram and all this kind of stuff. 1,000 Western companies have pulled out. The economy is effectively a wartime economy now. Nobody's happy in Russia. And so the only thing he's got left is fear. And fear works. People are afraid, as all this killing Navalny and all this other stuff. They're afraid until some moment when they're so angry that they're no longer afraid and they're just angry. And that's where dictators fall down. And that's where so yes, he's not strong. If you did an honest opinion poll, he wouldn't poll well. He wouldn't be
But you don't think that moment's coming, that uprising is coming, do you?
Nobody knows.
Yeah.
That's the thing. That was Alexei Navalny's bet. Why did he go back to Russia?
Yeah.
He went back to Russia thinking he was going to be arrested. He was going to sit in prison, and then Putin would fall apart because of some popular uprising. That was his bet. He didn't believe that Putin would last this long, and he didn't believe Putin would kill him.
Yeah.
But it's entirely possible, and that's what Putin is reacting to. Is he's sitting there scared? Why do you need to shut down every independent newspaper? Why do you need to kill why do you need to imprison every single person that calls the war a war? Why do you need to kill every opposition candidate? Because you're not strong. That is not the sign of a strong leader.
Bill, thank you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I thought Bill Browder was fascinating on the whole kind of scale of it, and he knows what he's talking about. But I thought it was really interesting what he said about being in Munich and the fact that he had the meetings with presumably David Cameron, presumably with David Lammy, the Labour shadow foreign secretary, and that they got this kind of stilted response of, we never pay any money to get anybody out, and therefore we can't do this to help this guy, Vladimir Karamurza, who is a British citizen, who has a British passport. And you kind of go back to Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, where for years the British government says, well, we can't
make a noise.
We can't make a noise, and we can't pay any money to the Iranians to get her out. When eventually they did. Yeah. They did do a deal that released the money that had been held for the sale of tanks or whatever it was all those years ago, dating back to the Shah.
So we want to hear from Labour. We want to hear from the government. We want to hear from those people in power who are telling us that nothing can be done to stop the death of another Putin political prisoner, this time a British citizen, from leaving Russia.
In a moment, we'll be talking about Kemi Badenoch, the business secretary, and her war with the former chairman of the post office, who she has accused of telling a pack of lies. He has come back and said, I was telling the truth. And my dear, dear friend, Lewis Goodall, has joined us in the studio.
Do you recognise him?
I was going to say, I think you'll find, John, it's more our dear, dear friend, John Sopel, is joining us in the studio. Good day, mate. How you doing?
We're going to come to that in a moment.
Oh, okay.
We're going to come to that in a moment.
Yeah.
So I have a few things to say about your collective behaviour in the past 2 weeks, which has profoundly disappointed me.
You're not getting a bit sensitive, are you, John?
No, I am just going to set the record straight because there has just been too much trash talking going on.
And someone else has been setting the record straight, haven't they?
Yeah,
the Sopel type.
Oh, that was beautifully done.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well, the ex-chairman of the post office, who apparently left by mutual consent (brackets) was fired unceremoniously by Kemi Badenoch, did an interview with the Sunday Times newspaper where he quoted a senior civil servant telling him to essentially drag his heels for as long as possible over repayments, the sub-postmasters and mistresses. Can we drag this out until after the election?
I mean, it was an extraordinary phrase that he used, which was that he had been instructed to stall on those compensation payouts so that the government would, his phrase, limp towards an election without too much financial liability. Now, he says he was told this phrase, by a civil servant at the time, and he wrote down limp towards an election because it had struck him as so extraordinary. So he says and stands by the fact that he has this in note form. Kemi Badenoch has called him a liar. And when Kemi Badenoch calls you a liar, she does not mince those words. No. She just comes out with it on Twitter, guns a-blazing.
Yeah, that all was happening over Sunday. And now it is happening over today as well, this sort of war of words between the business secretary Badenoch and the former post office chairman Henry Staunton. Because Staunton has issued a statement today in reply to this excoriation that Badenoch gave on Twitter on Sunday, basically attacking not only Staunton but also the Sunday Times journalist. And has to be said, Badenoch has some form on attacking journalists, which maybe we can talk about. But Staunton has told Sky News today it is pretty obvious what is really going on. It was in the interests of the business, as well as being fair for the postmasters. There was faster progress on exoneration and that compensation was more generous, but we didn't see any real movement until after the Missed Debates programme. I think it is pretty obvious to everyone what is going on, i.e. he is saying that ministers were not interested in providing swift financial relief and exoneration to the people caught up in the Horizon scandal until the ITV programme came along, and suddenly there was a load of political pressure, and he's saying he was the guy who basically was a scapegoat.
Well, if I'm Henry Staunton or I'm Kemi Badenoch, I would be instructing libel lawyers now, because one of them...
Well, one of them's lying.
One of them's lying. I mean, just to give you the full flavour of Kemi Badenoch's tweets that she put out yesterday. My call with Staunton was with officials. They took a complete record. He has given an interview full of lies about our conversation during his dismissal. The details will emerge soon enough, as I won't let the matter rest here, but we'll be discussing with government lawyers. Henry Staunton had a lack of grip getting justice for postmasters. The serious concerns over his conduct were the reasons I asked him to step down. Then he chose to run to the media with made-up anecdotes, and a series of falsehoods confirms I made the correct decision. I mean, wow. I mean, she is calling the person who came out of retirement to chair the post office post this whole scandal is being absolutely trashed here.
I mean, you can see the thought process, and I think we have to say at this point, we have not got concrete evidence either that Henry Saunders's version of events is true or that Kemi Badenoch's is true. But it does seem pretty odd that the government would be trying to pick a fight again with the sub-postmasters. I mean, after everything that we've seen, why would you try and withhold payments? Why would you make it more difficult for the people that had been through this absolutely excoriating, terrifying experience for the last, 20, 30 years?
Well, I suppose
right?
the reason that Badenoch is reacting so aggressively now is because she knows that this scandal has become so politically toxic to basically any minister or any politician who touches it, that she needs to be with one eye on a potential Conservative leadership contest, either
But
pre or after the election.
why wouldn't you be on the front foot then? Why wouldn't you
she
be
is, I
saying,
suppose.
well, I don't think the sub-postmasters are
No,
hearing this and
no.
thinking Kemi Badenoch is our saviour.
No, but I
Right?
suppose she just wants to be seen as any suggestion that as he has made, that basically she was just trying to find someone to take the fall for it
Yeah.
and just play politics with it could be so damaging to her politically, so
She has to
damaging
fight,
that she's
yeah.
got to fight. And she wasn't exactly helped out this morning terribly by her cabinet colleague, the lesser spotted, as she's occasionally become known now, I think, Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, who was on the Today programme being asked about the crucial question here now, right, is we have two different versions of events. And of course, like all ministerial conversations, civil servants always take a record. There's
Show
always
us
an
the
official
transcript.
who takes a
Yeah.
record of what was said. So let's see what the record said. Will the government publish exactly what that record kept by that civil servant or official has said? This was put to Gillian Keegan this morning. This is what she said.
Well, I'm sure they will, make a statement or release something. My understanding is that the government made clear in the appointment letter that, the focusing on and prioritising the compensation for sub-postmasters was a key aspect of the job. Now, obviously, he's been dismissed from that role, and there's been some articles in the Times, and I know some follow-up with my colleague, and I'm sure they'll be following up.
She's accused him of lying. Is she, as the government, going to be releasing notes of the conversation that backs that up?
Well, I haven't spoken to her about it, but I know that she has said that
It's a government decision, isn't it?
It was all recorded, and she said that she will be making a statement.
Right, so this has basically played out throughout the course of the day, so much so that Kemi Badenoch actually made a statement to the House of Commons about all of this. And I think it's fair to say that much like her response on Twitter, she was and sounded thoroughly pissed off.
Mr. Staunton claimed I told him that someone's got to take the rap for the Horizon scandal, and that was the reason for his dismissal. That was not the reason at all. I dismissed him because there were serious concerns about his behaviour as chair, including those raised from other directors on the board.
So she's come out, again, all guns blazing, and she has answered the question that has been buzzing around all day, which is, what is she going to do about the minutes of the conversation? She said in Parliament that she will have them published.
I should also inform the House that while he was in post, a formal investigation was launched into allegations made regarding Mr. Staunton's conduct. This included serious matters such as bullying. Concerns were brought to my department's attention about Mr. Staunton's willingness to cooperate with that investigation. So it is right that the British public know the facts behind this case and what was said in the phone call where I dismissed Mr. Staunton. Officials from my department were on the line. It was minuted, and a readout was sent after it took place. Today, I am depositing a copy of that readout in both libraries of the House so the honourable members and the public can see the truth.
So at time of recording, we haven't seen those yet. Might talk about it again tomorrow, but it is fair to say that this acrimony between Badenoch and Staunton there's no sign of peace breaking out anytime soon. Let's put it that way.
Kemi Badenoch is picking another fight today, and this time it's with a BBC drama about the Port Talbot Steelworks. This is the drama The Way, starring Michael Sheen, and she's called it a nakedly political drama, the most nakedly political drama on primetime TV for 40 years. Now, there is just something, isn't there, about when you're feeling cornered, attack the BBC.
Yeah.
Right? Just go for it. Attack the BBC for a nakedly political drama. I mean, let's not forget that there's quite a lot of drama that is nakedly political. And let's not forget that the BBC does make incredible drama and is allowed to do whatever kind of drama it wants to make. Presumably, this was something that was pretty close to the actor Michael Sheen's heart in the first place. But to start picking another fight, this time with Port Talbot, saying it's iconic to the British industry and that's why the government's investing so much. I mean, I'm not really sure if she's trying to sort of reinvigorate Welsh steel making or whether she just wants to kick the BBC.
Maybe they just hate dramas now. After Mr. Bates.
They're really
They're
nervous.
just very nervous
So
with any
knock the
drama
drama
they see.
first so that you don't believe it afterwards.
Breaking
Yeah.
Bad, Last of the Summer Wine. Oh, Christ. Take it off the air. Take it
Only
off
fools
the air.
and horses.
Yeah, get
That is-
rid of it.
That is an attack on market traders.
No, it's legitimising the black economy. Take it off the air right now.
Right, you two. I'm back.
I think he's talking to us.
And I'm not happy. I'm not happy with what happened every day last week and the week before. For a start, I mean, on Friday, the day I'm flying out of Australia, I get a message on LinkedIn from a woman I have never heard of before saying, I hear you're in Australia, Sydney. In fact, I hear you're precisely on Bondi Beach. What about a coffee sometime? I'm thinking, who is this woman?
Sorry, what's the problem here?
I
thought you'd enjoy this.
Look up her number. It is Britain's Consul General in Sydney who is listening to the podcast and listening to you two trash talk me. I fly back. I go Sydney, Doha, Heathrow, and Heathrow to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium.
Okay.
I am coming home on the tube, exhausted and somewhat demoralised by Tottenham's 2-1 defeat to Wolves.
That's not our fault.
Yeah, well, and a woman sitting opposite me on the tube, two women sitting opposite me on the tube, one leans over and says, Australia nice, was it? And I said, well,
that's just nice.
Bloody Lewis Goodall and Emily Maitlis going on. And then they said, well, you're always on holiday, aren't you? And I thought, oh, that's great.
Well, that's true.
That is absolutely Lewis Goodall and Emily Maitlis. And the final thing I want to say, in this calumny and tissue of lies, I stand by the thoroughness...
Hyde Park Corner, this.
I stand by the thoroughness and rigour of my interview with Taylor Swift 15 years ago. I held her fully to account.
It's funny, you know, she's always talking about that interview. She did a little magazine thing the other day. She was like, honestly, it's never been better than that time with John. So, sorry, what you're saying is that we solicited or prompted an email from a diplomat to you. You love that stuff. The next time you're in Australia is if you're not going to be speaking with a consul general or whatever the hell it is.
Sorry, can we just go back to Taylor Swift for a moment?
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's do that.
Was the only thing you actually said to the most famous woman in the entire world?
I think you'll find there is a 6-minute 32 interview that is available fully on the BBC
with Louise Minchin
archive.
and Taylor Smith.
With John Sopel and Louise Minchin and Taylor Swift, where I asked her many questions and we got on famously.
Did you stay in touch?
Famously.
We're very close.
Famously. They got on
Louise
famously.
or Taylor?
Very
Both.
close. I've got to say,
Meet up every year.
I've got to say that we reached the stage on this family holiday where my kids, Max and Anna, would just go to the end of the podcast to see how the piss had been taken out of their dad each bloody day. And they weren't disappointed, I can report.
We really should have started with it. Shouldn't we? We should have saved them the trouble.
Can't wait till you go away again. Next week, isn't it?
Goodbye.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.